They laughed because they thought you were harmless. But that laughter wasn't harmless. It was the beginning of their mistake. From the very start, they misread everything about you. Calm became clueless in their eyes. Silence became fear. Patience became weakness. And that distortion shaped every decision they made afterward. You didn't need to expose yourself. You didn't need to perform or prove anything. You simply allowed them to believe the version of reality they were most comfortable with. And that version slowly worked against them. People don't realize how often their own assumptions become the trap they step into. Think of a predator lying completely still in tall grass. It doesn't chase. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue with what passes by. It waits. And the ones who believe the environment is safe are the ones who move without caution. That single moment of overconfidence is what ends everything. That was the difference between you and them. While they were loud, reactive, and constantly trying to establish dominance, you were already positioned mentally, reading outcomes before actions even finished unfolding. They thought presence meant noise. You understood presence can exist without a sound. Here's what they never understood. The most dangerous awareness is quiet awareness, the kind that observes without attachment, the kind that remembers without emotion, the kind that doesn't rush to respond because it's already understood the situation. They needed validation, reaction, and confirmation. You needed none of it. And that imbalance is what shifted everything. While they were busy performing, you were collecting clarity. While they were trying to win moments, you were understanding patterns. Psychology has already shown this dynamic clearly. The less emotionally reactive a person is, the more control they naturally gain in complex social situations. Not through force, but through perception. Not through noise, but through timing. And now, the same people who once underestimated you are dealing with the consequences of their own assumptions. Restless, frustrated, confused by how things unfolded without being able to pinpoint a single moment of failure. Because there was no obvious explosion, no confrontation they can point to, just a gradual loss of control they didn't notice until it was already done. You never entered situations trying to dominate them. You entered them understanding them. You let people reveal themselves fully without interruption. And in doing so, every move they made only clarified the truth you already saw from the beginning. They thought you were behind. You were ahead. They thought you were confused. You were calculating. They thought you were soft. You were restrained. They ran strategies like amateurs, repeating the same tricks, thinking you wouldn't notice. Meanwhile, you were watching patterns stack up like evidence in a courtroom. Every lie, every delay, every forced smile, every fake concern. You saw it all. The funniest part, they really believed they were winning. That's how arrogance works. It blinds people. It makes them sloppy. It makes them loud. It makes them predictable. And you let them stay comfortable in that delusion because comfort makes people careless. Then the shift happened. Subtle at first. Their words stopped landing. Their tactics stopped working. Their control started slipping. Confusion crept in. Why aren't you reacting? Why aren't you upset? Why aren't you chasing? That's when fear replaced confidence. Not loud fear, quiet fear. The kind that keeps people awake at night. You didn't expose them. You didn't confront them. You didn't need to. You let the universe do what it always does when someone overplays their hand. It collapses their illusions slowly, publicly, painfully. They revealed themselves. Their masks cracked. Their stories stopped lining up. Their energy shifted. And when it finally hit them, when they realized you knew from the beginning, the damage was already done. There was no reset, no apology that could rewind time, no excuse strong enough to fix what they broke. You were never the victim in this story. You were the trap they walked into willingly, the one they laughed at, the one they dismissed, the one they thought they could control. That misjudgment will haunt them longer than any argument ever could. They never suspected you because people like them don't understand discipline. They don't understand restraint. They think power has to be loud, aggressive, and obvious. They can't imagine someone choosing silence while holding all the leverage. That blind spot is fatal. Now they watch you differently, speak to you differently, move around you differently. Some avoid you. Some try to get close again. Some pretend nothing happened. None of it matters. The balance shifted, and they know it. You didn't change. Your mask never slipped. They just finally realized who they were dealing with far too late. And that realization burns worse than any loss. Stay calm, stay observant, stay unreadable. They already learned the lesson. And now, chosen one, pause for just a moment. If you're still here, it's because something inside you already knows this message isn't random. You felt it click. You felt that quiet grin form when you realized, yeah, they really never saw me coming. So don't rush past this part. Stay. Lean in. What comes next is where the real clarity hits. And missing it would be like walking away right before the final move lands. If you're locked in, let it be known. Drop a comment with 777. Not for show, not for hype, but as a signal to yourself that you understand what just happened in your life. And if this message is giving you that calm confidence, that grounded certainty, support it in whatever small way you can. These messages exist because people choose to keep them moving forward. Every bit of support fuels the reach, and reach is how awareness spreads. Now take a breath. Shake off the noise. The universe didn't bring you here to skim. It brought you here to see the full picture. We're about to break this down step by step, clean and clear, so you understand exactly how you fooled them, why it worked, and how to move from here with even more control. Stay till the end. If you're really who this message is for, you won't feel the urge to leave. Let's get into it. Number 1. They thought your silence meant you were losing. That was the moment they lost. People who talk the least usually see the most, and that's why they scare everyone in the end. They misread your quietness in the worst way possible. They looked at your silence and decided it meant confusion. They watched you stay calm and assumed you were behind. They saw you not reacting and told themselves you didn't understand what was happening. That single mistake gave you the upper hand without you lifting a finger. While they were busy labeling you, you were busy reading the entire room like an open file. You weren't quiet because you were scared. You weren't quiet because you lacked confidence. You were quiet because noise reveals nothing, but patience reveals everything. While they were talking too much, explaining themselves too much, performing too much, you were watching patterns form. You were seeing who shifted when power moved, who smiled without meaning it, who got tense under attention. You didn't guess, you observed. That's what they never understood. Silence isn't empty. Silence is a mirror. When you stop reacting, people start exposing. They fill the space with their true nature. They rush to show their hand because they think they're safe. They think no one is watching closely. That's where they messed up with you. They ran their little tests, the subtle disrespect, the delayed responses, the fake praise mixed with hidden envy, the jokes meant to test your limits. They wanted a reaction. They wanted proof that you could be moved emotionally. And every time you didn't give it to them, they assumed you didn't notice. That assumption was deadly. You noticed everything. You noticed tone shifts when you succeeded. You noticed who went quiet when your name came up. You noticed who copied your moves while pretending not to care. You noticed who wanted access to your energy without giving respect, loyalty, or honesty back. You noticed who smiled in public but competed in private. And you didn't expose any of it because you didn't need to. Here's the part that hits them hardest. Your silence didn't protect them, it trapped them. Because when you don't react, people feel safe revealing themselves. They think they're winning, they think they're smarter, they think they're in control. And in that comfort, they overplay everything. They repeat patterns, they expose motives, they contradict themselves. They show insecurity without realizing it. Think of it like this. A hunter who makes noise scares everything away. A hunter who stays still lets the target walk straight into view. You stayed still. You let them walk right into their own exposure. Every word they spoke, every move they made, every fake strategy they ran became evidence. You didn't need to confront them. You just needed time. They thought you were slow. In reality, you were precise. They thought you were unaware. In reality, you were processing at a level they couldn't reach. They wasted energy trying to outshine you, control you, or confuse you. You saved energy by letting the universe handle timing while you handled awareness. At this point, a question starts forming in your mind, and you already know the answer. If I saw all of this, why didn't I act sooner? Because acting too early would have warned them. Silence kept them careless. Silence kept them sloppy. Silence let them believe the lie that you were harmless. And people make their worst mistakes when they believe that shock for them wasn't that you pulled away. It wasn't that you changed direction. It wasn't that you stopped engaging. The real shock was realizing how long you had known. When you finally moved differently, when you cut access, shifted priorities, or made a clean decision without explanation, it hit them all at once. You weren't reacting, you were concluding. They replayed conversations in their head. They questioned moments they thought didn't matter. They wondered how you stayed so calm while they were running plans. That's when panic replaces confidence. Because nothing scares a manipulator more than realizing they were seen the whole time. Your quietness was never weakness. It was strategy without performance. It was discipline without announcement. It was power that didn't need validation. And that kind of power is invisible to loud people until it's too late. Another question you might be asking yourself right now is, why do they seem uncomfortable around me now? Because the mask slipped. They know you know. Even if you never said a word, your energy changed. Your presence changed. You stopped feeding the game. You stopped playing a role they could predict. And unpredictability terrifies people who rely on control. They can't provoke you anymore. They can't read you anymore. They can't use the same tricks anymore. And deep down, they understand why. Your silence trained you to see clearly. Their noise trained them to miss the obvious. You never needed to be louder. You never needed to be aggressive. You never needed to dominate the room. You let them believe the story where they were ahead, and that belief destroyed their awareness. While they were busy performing, you were positioning. This is why they never suspected you. People like them think power looks loud, reactive and visible. They don't understand quiet strength. They don't understand restraint. They don't understand someone who can sit in discomfort without leaking emotion. That blind spot is exactly how you slipped past their defenses. You weren't hiding. You were mastering self-control. You weren't passive. You were selective. You weren't lost. You were waiting for the moment when action actually mattered. And when that moment came, you didn't need drama. You didn't need speeches. You didn't need revenge. You simply moved. And that move hit harder than any argument ever could. They misread your quietness, and that misread cost them access, influence, and control. You walked away with clarity. They walked away with confusion. You stayed grounded. They stayed exposed. Your silence was the weapon they never saw, and now they can't unsee it. Number 2, you didn't feel them. You dissected them. Anyone can hear words. Very few can read the machinery behind them. You don't fall for masks because you're too busy studying the face underneath. They tried to act their way past you, not realizing you were reading the script and the wiring. Your discernment was never emotional. It was surgical, cold, exact. You didn't just sense vibes or react to moods like people assumed. You analyzed people the way a mechanic studies an engine. You didn't care how shiny it looked on the outside. You listened for the misfires. You noticed where things didn't line up. You paid attention to what wasn't being said. Most people live on the surface. They hear words and take them at face value. They see smiles and assume safety. You never worked like that. You always looked past the performance and straight into the structure. While others were distracted by charm, you were noticing timing. While others were moved by emotion, you were tracking consistency. While others were impressed by confidence, you were spotting cracks. Imagine this. 2 buildings look identical from the outside. Same paint, same windows, same height. One is solid steel. The other is held together with cheap supports and shortcuts. From the street, no one can tell the difference. But you can. You always could. You didn't need stress tests or collapse to know which one would fall. You saw it in the design. That's how you read people. You picked up on intentions the same way others pick up on facial expressions. A slight delay, a forced laugh, a compliment that felt out of place, a story that sounded right but didn't feel right. You didn't react emotionally to these things. You logged them one by one, quietly, precisely. And that's why manipulation rarely worked on you. Flattery slid right past you because you could hear the hunger behind it. Guilt didn't hook you because you could tell when it was being used as a tool. Fake kindness didn't confuse you because you could feel the transaction underneath it. You weren't impressed by rehearsed humility or dramatic vulnerability. You could sense when someone was performing instead of being honest. Here's what they never understood. You weren't overthinking. You were out processing them. They thought you were too deep, too intense, too cautious. What they really meant was you were seeing layers they didn't even know existed. You weren't paranoid. You were accurate. And accuracy makes liars uncomfortable. Imagine watching a magician perform a trick while everyone else is amazed. But you're focused on the hands, the timing, the setup. The trick doesn't work on you because you're not watching where they want you to look. That's how every manipulator felt around you. Something about you disrupted their illusion. They couldn't quite figure out why. Another image. Think of a doctor reading an X-ray while everyone else is judging a person by their outfit. That's the gap between you and them. You saw fractures, weaknesses, pressure points, not to exploit, but to understand. You didn't need proof. You saw the truth before the symptoms ever showed. A question probably crossed your mind more than once. Why do I always feel like I know what someone is about before they prove it? Because you weren't waiting for damage to confirm the diagnosis. You read the blueprint. You trusted pattern over promise. You trusted structure over speech. That discernment saved you more times than you'll ever count. It stopped you from committing fully to people who would have drained you. It kept you from trusting smiles that hid resentment. It warned you when something looked good but felt wrong. And most of the people who underestimated you never realized how close they came to being exposed early. Imagine someone walking around with a cracked foundation, smiling confidently, thinking no one can tell. Then imagine standing in front of someone who can see straight through walls. That's what it felt like to stand near you. Even when you said nothing, your presence alone made people uneasy. They felt scanned, not judged, seen. That's why some people talked more around you. Others talked less. Some tried harder to impress you. Others avoided you entirely. Your discernment disrupted their comfort because it couldn't be controlled. You didn't chase approval. You didn't need explanations. You didn't rush conclusions. You waited until everything lined up. And when it did, you didn't explode. You didn't accuse. You didn't argue. You simply adjusted your position, pulled back, changed axis, shifted direction. That's when it hit them. You weren't reacting. You were confirming. They thought they were being subtle. You saw the structure. They thought they were clever. You saw the motive. They thought they were ahead. You saw the end. Here's another hard truth. People who rely on deception always assume others are as surface level as they are. They don't imagine someone studying architecture while they're focused on paint. That assumption is what got them fooled. They tried to play you using emotion, drama, and performance. You were immune because you were never playing the same game. Imagine trying to win a sword fight against someone who's already disarmed you without touching the blade. That's what this was. They came in swinging stories and tactics. You came in reading structure and intention. The outcome was decided before they even realized there was a fight. If you ever wondered why you felt exhausted around certain people without anything bad happening, this is why your discernment was working overtime. You were processing what others ignored. That exhaustion wasn't weakness. It was information overload. You were picking up signals most people don't even register. And now it makes sense why they never suspected you. They didn't think someone quiet could be that precise. They didn't think someone calm could be that sharp. They didn't think someone who didn't react could be that aware. That misjudgment sealed their fate. You weren't emotional. You were anatomical. You didn't feel your way through people. You mapped them. You didn't guess intentions. You confirmed them. You didn't fall for illusions. You saw the framework holding them together. That's why you slipped past every defense. That's why their tricks failed. That's why by the time they figured out who you really were, the outcome was already decided. You didn't simply outplay them. You understood their patterns more deeply than they ever understood themselves. They labeled you as soft, because they only recognize force in its loudest, most chaotic form. In their definition, strength is volume, dominance, and visible aggression. But you never played by that definition, and that's where their judgment collapsed. You didn't respond the way they expected. No shouting, no arguing, no emotional escalation, no desperate need to justify your position. From their perspective, that looked like absence of power. In their world, whoever speaks the loudest feels like they're winning. So they misread your calm as weakness. That assumption became the very thing that put them at a disadvantage. You weren't soft, you were controlled. And control, when combined with awareness, is something most people don't know how to defend against. You don't engage the way reactive people do. You don't waste energy trying to overpower moments or force outcomes. You observe first. You study patterns instead of emotions. You wait for people to reveal what they are without realizing they're being read. While they're reacting, you're positioning. While they're trying to win attention, you're identifying structure. You don't fight chaos with more chaos. You let chaos expose itself until it becomes unstable on its own. Picture this. Two people trying to bring down the same structure. One attacks it blindly, exhausting themselves with every impact. The other quietly removes what holds it together. One creates noise, the other creates collapse. That second approach is what they didn't see coming, because it doesn't look like an attack. It looks like patience. It looks like stillness. But underneath that stillness is precision, and precision always finishes what emotion cannot. You don't argue with distortion. You let it unravel. You don't chase control. You remove dependency. And because of that, when things start to fall apart, there's no single moment they can point to and say, "That was you." No spectacle, no confrontation, just a quiet chain reaction they can no longer stop. And slowly, everything they thought they controlled starts slipping. Trust, alignment, stability, certainty. And by the time they realize what happened, the structure is already gone. And the scariest part for them is this question they can't shake. Did they do this on purpose? The answer is simple. You didn't need to do much at all. You don't need force when timing is on your side. They were fighting emotionally. You were operating strategically. They tried to hurt you directly. You let the universe reflect their actions back at them. That's why relationships around them start breaking. Lies unravel. Masks slip. Not because you attacked, but because you stepped out of the way and let truth take center stage. Another image. Imagine stepping out of a tug-of-war instead of pulling back. The other side falls flat on their face. That's what happened here. They expected resistance. You gave them space, and that space exposed everything. They weren't fighting a person. They were fighting patience. They were fighting precision. They were fighting someone who understands that real power doesn't announce itself. Soft people react. Strategic people end games. By the time they realized you weren't what they thought, it was already too late to adjust. You had moved. You had detached. You had dismantled the situation without ever stepping into the mess. They thought you were soft. What they were really dealing with was someone who knows exactly when not to fight. Number 4. Your very presence made their jealousy leak out. You didn't threaten them. You exposed them just by standing there. You didn't have to say a word to reveal what was rotten inside them. You didn't call anyone out. You didn't challenge egos. You didn't press wounds. You simply existed in the room, grounded and unbothered. And that alone made people uncomfortable. That's how you know the envy was real. Truth reacts to pressure, and your presence was pressure. Some people smiled too hard around you. Others over-explained. Some rushed to compliment you in ways that felt forced and strangely timed. A few suddenly started competing, even when there was no competition. None of that was random. Those were leaks, cracks in the mask, signals that something inside them felt threatened by your calm confidence. Envy doesn't announce itself. It twitches. Imagine a room with bad wiring. Everything looks fine until a strong current passes through. Then lights flicker, sparks fly, faults reveal themselves. You were that current. You didn't create the damage. You revealed what was already unstable. That's why being around you made certain people restless. They could feel themselves being seen. You weren't reading words. You were reading reactions. You noticed who celebrated you and who tolerated you, who mirrored you and who subtly tried to one-up you, who went quiet when your name came up, who suddenly needed attention when you walked in. You didn't judge it. You logged it. People only feel exposed when they're hiding something. You didn't expose them publicly, and that's what hurt the most. You let them sit with themselves. You let the universe handle the reveal while you stayed clean. No drama, no confrontation, just quiet clarity. That's why your presence scares them more than arguments ever could. You don't fight envy, you outgrow it. And they feel that shift immediately. You didn't reveal them by attacking. You revealed them by being real. Number 5. You were never surrounded. You were several moves ahead. Crowds don't win wars. Precision does. They told themselves you were outnumbered to feel brave. More voices, more opinions, more people whispering on the sidelines. They thought numbers meant power. That stacking bodies on one side of the board would scare you into folding. That belief kept them comfortable, and comfort makes people sloppy. You never played the numbers game. You played the angles. While they gathered allies, you gathered information. While they hyped each other up, you watched how fast their stories changed. While they relied on noise and backup, you relied on timing. They moved as a group. You moved with intention. That's the difference between a mob and a strategist. 10 loud people still panic when one calm person controls the pace. Imagine a pack chasing what they think is prey, all running in the same direction, tripping over each other. Then imagine one person quietly closing the exits, controlling terrain, deciding when and where the chase ends. That was you. They mistook motion for momentum. You understood flow. They thought they were leading because they were talking the most. They thought they were winning because they felt supported. But leadership isn't about who shouts orders. It's about who understands consequences. You didn't need agreement, you needed leverage. People who need backup are afraid to stand alone. You noticed how quickly unity fell apart under pressure, how alliances cracked the moment things stopped going their way, how confidence evaporated when no one was watching. You didn't need to confront the group. You just waited for gravity to do its job. Another image. A swarm of flies looks overwhelming until one clean motion clears the room. Numbers without coordination collapse fast. That's what happened here. They weren't strong. They were crowded. You were never outnumbered. They were outcalculated. Number 6. You didn't stay quiet because you were weak. You stayed quiet because you were done. Exposure is loud. Control is silent. You didn't expose them, and that confused people. Some thought it meant you were scared. Others assumed you lacked proof. A few even believed you were protecting them. All of those assumptions were wrong. You chose peace, not because you couldn't strike, but because striking wasn't necessary. You already saw the ending. Silence wasn't avoidance. Silence was command. You understood something most people never learn. When you expose someone too early, you give them a stage. You give them excuses, defenses, and sympathy. When you step back instead, you give them space to self-destruct. And people who rely on lies always destroy themselves when left alone with their own behavior. The truth doesn't need help. It needs time. Imagine cutting the power to a room instead of pointing out the mess. Everything stops hiding. Shadows disappear. What's broken becomes obvious without explanation. That's what your patients did. You didn't argue with lies. You let consistency crush them. You didn't defend yourself. You let outcomes speak. They kept talking. You kept watching. They kept lying. You kept stepping back. They kept digging. You let the hole get deep enough that no one could ignore it. Another image. Think of stepping out of the way while someone sprints toward a wall. You didn't push them. You didn't warn them. You just moved. Impact was inevitable. That impact wasn't your fault. Restraint hurts manipulators more than resistance ever could. Your choice wasn't passive. It was final. You withdrew access. You protected your energy. You trusted the universe to expose what you already understood. And when the truth came out, it came out clean. No fingerprints, no drama, no mess attached to your name. Your restraint didn't make noise, it made results, and that hit harder than any confrontation ever would. Number 7. They thought you were clueless. You were holding a mirror the whole time. People hate mirrors because mirrors don't lie. They looked at your calm eyes and soft tone and decided you were naive, easy, unaware, someone they could test without consequence. What they didn't realize was that you weren't absorbing their behavior, you were reflecting it. Every move they made bounced straight back to them, clean and undeniable. You didn't chase lies, you didn't argue facts. You let people hear themselves. You let them repeat their stories. You let them watch their own contradictions stack up. That's what a mirror does. It doesn't accuse, it shows. A liar only panics when they hear their own words played back. Imagine someone talking confidently into a microphone, only to hear their voice echo back, slightly delayed. At first it's funny, then it's unsettling. Then they can't think straight. That's what your presence did. Their manipulation lost rhythm around you. Their confidence stuttered. They started correcting themselves mid-sentence, explaining too much, filling silence with noise. They thought they were testing you, seeing how far they could push, measuring your reactions. But every test they ran became a measurement of them. How patient were they? How honest? How consistent? They failed without realizing there was an exam. Think of someone shadowboxing, throwing punches at the air, only to realize the glass in front of them is cracking. That's what happened. Their aggression, their lies, their subtle disrespect, all left marks they couldn't erase. Truth doesn't chase, it reflects. When the reflection finally hit them, it was brutal. Not because you exposed them, but because there was nowhere to hide. You didn't label them. You let their behavior define them. You didn't raise your voice. You raised awareness. And once someone sees themselves clearly, they can never unsee it. That mirror changed everything. Number 8. Your energy pulled their skeletons out of hiding. Some people panic not because you attack them, but because you remind them who they really are. You didn't press buttons. You didn't provoke reactions. You didn't corner anyone with questions or accusations. You showed up as yourself, grounded and real. And that alone was enough to shake what they buried. Your energy didn't demand honesty. It summoned it. That's what confused them. They couldn't explain why being around you made them uneasy. You weren't threatening. You weren't aggressive. You weren't judging. Yet something inside them felt exposed, like a locked door suddenly opening on its own. That discomfort wasn't caused by you. It was caused by what they were hiding from themselves. Truth doesn't knock. It walks in when the room is quiet enough. Imagine walking into a room with a bad smell that everyone pretends not to notice. The moment fresh air enters, the stench becomes obvious. That's what your presence did. You didn't create the rot. You made it impossible to ignore. Hidden resentment surfaced. Old insecurities flared. Buried guilt got loud. They started acting strange around you, overreacting, pulling away, acting defensive for no clear reason. That wasn't intuition on their part. That was panic. When someone's inner mess starts bubbling up, confusion is the first sign. Another image. Think of dust sitting untouched for years. One beam of light hits it, and suddenly it's everywhere. That beam was you. Calm, steady, unavoidable. People fear exposure most when they've spent years hiding from themselves. You didn't need answers from them. You already saw the reactions. The truth surfaced on its own schedule, and your stillness gave it room to rise. That's why they couldn't control the situation. They didn't know what was happening, only that it was happening around you. Your advantage was simple. You stayed real, and reality rattles anyone living a lie. Number 9. You didn't go for them. You went for the pattern running them. Anyone can fight a person. Very few can break the machine behind them. You never wasted energy attacking faces, names, or personalities. That's amateur work. You went deeper. You studied repetition. You watched cycles repeat themselves until they exposed the system underneath. While others reacted emotionally to behavior, you traced the source of it. That's why your moves felt surgical. You weren't swinging, you were cutting power. Most people argue with symptoms. You targeted causes. Imagine a leaky ceiling. Some people keep wiping the floor, getting angrier every time water drips. You shut off the pipe. One move, no drama, problem solved. That's how you operate. You don't get distracted by who's making the noise. You silence what keeps producing it. Patterns don't lie, and they don't defend themselves. Well, you noticed how the same manipulation showed up in different forms, different words, same outcome, different people, same tactics. Once you saw the loop, the people inside it lost control. You didn't need confrontation, you needed interruption. When you stepped out of the cycle, the whole structure shook. Another image. Think of pulling one thread from a sweater instead of yanking at the fabric. Everything loosens slowly, cleanly. No mess, no struggle. That's why your actions looked effortless. You weren't fighting resistance. You were removing support. Break the pattern and the person panics. They couldn't adapt because they never learned another way to operate. Their power depended on repetition. Yours depended on awareness. When you changed your response, the game ended. No more leverage, no more predictability, just silence where control used to be. You didn't attack them. You attacked what kept them powerful. And once the pattern died, everything else followed. Number 10. You never raced them. You let them run themselves into the wall. The smartest move is refusing to play a stupid game. You never competed with them, and that's what shattered their confidence. They expected resistance. They wanted rivalry. They needed you to engage so they could measure themselves against you. You denied them that, not out of fear, not out of confusion, but out of clarity. You saw the game for what it was, and you chose not to step onto the board. While they were busy proving, posturing, comparing, and flexing, you were watching how predictable they were becoming. They repeated the same moves, the same traps, the same emotional plays. They burned energy, trying to win battles you weren't even fighting. That imbalance alone decided the outcome. People who need to compete are already behind. Imagine someone shadowboxing in an empty room, sweating, yelling, convinced they're dominating a fight. Meanwhile, the real opponent is outside, locking the door. That's how this played out. They thought you were avoiding them. In reality, you were sealing exits. When you finally moved, it wasn't reactionary. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't rushed. It felt sudden to them only because they weren't paying attention. To you, it was inevitable. You had already seen where everything was heading. You simply chose the moment that required the least effort and the maximum impact. Reaction is loud. Inevitability is quiet. Your wins didn't come with celebration. They came with finality. Situations shifted and never went back. Access disappeared and stayed gone. Influence evaporated with no explanation. They looked for a rematch that would never happen because the game was already over. Another image. Think of a chess match where one player keeps sacrificing pieces for drama while the other calmly waits for checkmate. No noise, no chaos, just precision. The cleanest victories don't feel like fights at all. You didn't outplay them by trying harder. You outsmarted them by never competing. Number 11. You were untouchable because you never needed their applause. People can't control you if you don't need them to clap. They tried everything they knew. Praise to pull you closer, criticism to shake you, silence to starve you, attention to bait you. None of it worked, and that terrified them. Their entire playbook depends on one thing most people never question: the need to be approved of. You didn't have that weakness. You weren't fueled by compliments, so flattery bounced off. You weren't driven by recognition, so being ignored didn't hurt. You weren't addicted to validation, so criticism didn't bend you. They kept pressing buttons that didn't exist, wondering why nothing happened. When approval isn't your currency, manipulation goes bankrupt. Imagine someone trying to steer a car by pushing on the hood instead of touching the wheel. That's what this was. They applied pressure in all the wrong places, expecting you to react like everyone else. You didn't flinch because your direction never came from them in the first place. Most people perform. You don't. You move whether you're seen or not. That independence confused them. They couldn't reward you into loyalty or shame you into compliance. You didn't rise or fall based on their opinion, and that stripped them of leverage instantly. Praise controls the insecure. Silence frees the self-directed. Another image. Think of a remote control with dead batteries. No matter how hard someone presses the buttons, nothing changes. That's how you felt to them. Unresponsive, grounded, out of reach. They didn't lose because you fought harder. They lost because you never handed them control. You don't need validation, and that made you impossible to defeat. Number 12. They thought they were evaluating you. You were grading them. The most dangerous test is the one no one knows they're taking. They walked around thinking they were reading you, sizing you up, figuring out where you stood. That illusion made them careless. They spoke freely. They acted naturally. They revealed habits they would have hidden if they knew the truth. What they never realized was that the spotlight wasn't on you, it was on them. You weren't suspicious, you were observant. Every choice they made became data. How they treated people who couldn't help them, how they reacted when they didn't get credit, how fast they shifted stories when pressure showed up. You weren't waiting for a big betrayal, you were watching the small tells. Those never lie. Character shows up when no one thinks it matters. Imagine someone taking an exam they think is a practice quiz. No stress, no caution, just instincts. That's what you gave them. Comfort, space, time. And in that comfort, they showed you exactly who they were. The test wasn't hard. It was quiet. They failed not because they were attacked, but because they were consistent. The same patterns kept showing up. The same excuses, the same manipulations dressed in different words. You didn't interrupt. You let repetition do the talking. Patterns are confessions in slow motion. By the time the results were clear to you, the decision was already made. You didn't announce it. You didn't explain it. You simply adjusted access, changed direction, moved on. That's when confusion hit them. When did this happen? What went wrong? What went wrong was simple. They never knew they were being measured. And once the test was over, there were no retakes. Number 13. You don't throw the first punch, you throw the last one. Anyone can start chaos. Very few know how to end it. You never rush to act. And that confused them. They're used to people reacting fast, emotionally, sloppily. They expect anger. They expect confrontation. They expect mistakes. You gave them none of that. You waited not because you were unsure, but because you were precise. You understood that timing isn't patience, it's power. You let situations mature. You let people grow comfortable. You let patterns repeat until the outcome was guaranteed. While they were busy making noise, you were calculating exits, consequences, and final positions. You weren't deciding if you should act. You were deciding when it would be irreversible. A rushed move can be undone. A final move can't. Imagine a door slowly closing while someone talks behind it, unaware. They keep speaking, keep posturing, keep believing they still have access. Then the latch clicks. No slam, no warning, just silence. That's how you strike. Clean, quiet, done. You don't threaten, you don't announce, you don't explain yourself mid-action. You wait until there's nothing left to debate. By the time you move, there's no argument that can change it, no apology that can rewind it, no effort that can reopen what's closed. Final actions don't need justification. They speak for themselves. They thought your silence meant hesitation. It didn't. It meant certainty was loading. When the strike came, it wasn't dramatic. It was absolute access gone, position changed, chapter closed. And the part that haunts them is this. They never saw it coming because they were too busy waiting for a first move. You don't strike to scare, you strike to finish. That's why, when you act, there's no sequel. Number 14. You were never on trial. You were the one passing sentence. They thought they were hunting. They were being evaluated. You were never the victim in this story. Even when it looked that way from the outside, you weren't scrambling. You weren't cornered. You weren't waiting to be saved. You were watching, calmly, closely. While they assumed you were trying to survive, you were deciding outcomes. That's the part they never understood. You didn't feel the need to defend yourself, because those who understand their position don't waste energy arguing with people still trying to figure out theirs. You stayed silent not out of confusion, but because silence reveals more than explanation ever could. While others rushed to be seen, you chose to observe. And in that observation, people exposed themselves without realizing it. Think of it like a courtroom, where one side keeps speaking, trying to control the room with noise and emotion, believing that volume is power. But the one in control doesn't interrupt, doesn't react, just listens. And when the final decision comes, everything that was said before becomes irrelevant. That is exactly how this played out. They misunderstood your calm as absence of strength, when in reality, it was the highest form of control. Nothing they did went unnoticed. Every contradiction, every excuse, every attempt to shift responsibility was silently recorded in awareness. You weren't reacting emotionally, and you weren't getting pulled into personal battles. You were seeing clearly. And clarity is dangerous to people who rely on confusion. They expected you to break, to respond impulsively, to fall into the same emotional traps they operate from. But what they encountered instead was restraint, presence without noise, authority without performance. And when you finally made your move, it didn't look like retaliation. It looked like conclusion. No anger, no chaos, just finality. And that is what unsettled them most. Not that you reacted, but that you didn't need to. They believed they were influencing the situation. They only realized later they were being understood the entire time. And once understanding is complete, attachment ends. Chosen one, this is the moment of awareness they can't undo. While they deal with the outcome, you remain steady, unchanged, unaffected. That is clarity. That is control. If this message resonates, Support it so it can reach others who need the same perspective. And if you're new here, join the space. Stay aware, stay grounded, stay ahead, because in the end, those who win aren't the loudest. They're the ones who see everything before they ever move.